What's up, YouTube? I'm Jeff the dog trainer, and these are the top 5 things you should look for in a dog trainer that you're looking to hire. Let's get into it. Alright, first thing you want to look for when you're out hiring a dog trainer is what kind of training methods do they use. Now, this seems really simple, but it can actually be a pretty tough task to figure out. Trainers that use positive punishment, meaning they're adding something like pain or discomfort to the dog in order to get the dog to do something, they tend to use really flowery language. Key words you want to look for here are things like balance training. Balance training can sound really nice up front, right? Like, oh, it's balanced, it's holistic, it's, oh, I'm going to center my dog's chi or something. That's not what it means. Balance training essentially means we use the carrot and we use the stick. This is a very simplified version, but it would be like if you ask your dog to sit and he sits, good job, he gets a treat. If he doesn't sit, then we zap him with a shock collar. That training has a lot of negative effects on the psyche of a dog. And I have trained dogs that have been through balance training in the past, and oftentimes what will happen is the dog doesn't want to do any behavior. Balance training results oftentimes in dogs playing along for a little bit, and then they just stop altogether because they're scared to do anything. They're scared to attempt a behavior because they might get it wrong and face some punishment later on. Another thing to look out for is dominance theory training. It kind of got its rise in the 1940s, but then it kind of fell away in the 1980s with Karen Pryor coming along. And then it saw a rise again in the early 2000s because of shows like The Dog Whisperer with Cesar Millan. And I'm not going to get into Cesar Millan's tactics here, and I'm not making this video to bash any other trainer, but dominance theory, the way you can identify that when you're looking at dog trainers are key phrases like lead the pack, be the alpha, pack leader, things like that. Oftentimes they'll actually put the word pack in their company name or in their training program. Dominance theory is not very effective in dog training. There's a few reasons for that. Dominance always has to do with resources, not teaching behaviors. And for those of you that are fortunate enough to have multiple dogs in your household, you can actually see this amongst your dogs. Maybe one dog is dominant over the water where you put a water bowl down and that dog always gets water first, and then the other one can get it later when that one's done. But maybe that other dog is dominant over a spot on the couch and he always sits there, and the other dog can't sit there unless that dog is moved. And this is how dominance works among wolves and among dogs, is it always has to do with resources. And just because a dog is dominant over one resource does not mean they're dominant over everything. So think of it like a marriage. For those of you that are lucky enough to be married out there, one of you might plan a vacation where another one controls the finances. Well, no one is dominant in the marriage. You each have aspects that you both kind of take lead on, but no one person is just controlling every single thing. And the other reason dominance theory isn't really ideal in dog training is because there's no evidence that dogs see us as a part of their social structure. Just like we don't consult our dogs on when we should file our taxes, they don't consult us on who should control the water bowl. Dominance theory can also be very detrimental when it comes to aggression issues. Most of the time when dogs are aggressive, they're aggressive in a defensive type of nature. Dominance theory would have us believe that we need to overpower the dog in that situation. We need to grab the dog and pin him down. Well, that's not really ideal. And again, I'll relate it back to people. Let's say you have a young child and he's scared of the doctor, and the doctor walks in, so you grab the child and pin him to the ground. Is he going to feel better about the next time he sees a doctor? Absolutely not. And it's the same thing with dogs. If they're scared and they growl at us, they're not trying to be dominant. They're trying to say, hey, back up. I don't like this situation at all. There are other much more positive ways to work through that benefits us and the dog much better than dominance theory or balance training. All right, so the second thing you want to look for when you're looking to hire a dog trainer is what certifications do they have? Now, this comes as a shock to most people, but there is no requirement for dog trainers to have any certification, at least on a federal level. So you could go out if you've never owned a dog in your life, never trained a dog before, and just start a dog training business. I wouldn't recommend it, but you could do it. And so it's really important that we look at what certification does a dog trainer have and where did they get that certification from and who backs that certification. So what I've seen before, especially with bigger dog training companies, is they will certify a dog trainer, but then if you look into that certification, it's a certification that the company itself runs, and it's not necessarily accredited by anybody else. So you really want to look at where they get their certification from and who backs it and who backs that training method. What training method were they trained in, and are they using that with your dog? And the third thing you want to look for when you're looking to hire a dog trainer is if they were referred to you, who referred them to you? And if they weren't referred to you, maybe you found them through an online search, then who do they have partnerships with? Big things you want to look out for here are relationships with vets and animal shelters. And I say that because a lot of vets and some animal shelters will only work with trainers who use a positive reinforcement approach to training. For example, with animal shelters in my community, our local animal shelter, they not only will only work with trainers who use positive reinforcement, but they actually require references from past clients, and they'll call them up and make sure that you only use positive reinforcement with those clients. That's a great referral source, and a lot of people out there will do that, especially vets and animal shelters. So you want to look for that. Now, the only caveat to this would be if maybe they just started out in business, if they're less than 6 months old or so, they may not have those relationships built quite yet. And that's okay. In that case, you could check out a little bit further and, do a little more digging into their methods and what kind of certifications they use. But if they've been around for more than 6 months to a year, they should have relationships with local businesses. And you really want to look for those vets and animal shelters that they work with. All right, so tip number 4 will come after either a phone call with them where you've described your situation, or maybe a consult you've done with them where they've come over or you've gone to them and they've actually met your dog and got a little more info from you. And so after they understand your situation, I would recommend asking the trainer, what does training look like? What does your training program look like? Now, we have to be careful here. We can't expect them to get into detail on exactly how they're going to train the dog without paying for it, because we're we're training dogs for business. We want to make money. And so yeah, that might be hidden behind a paywall. But we want a 30,000-foot view of what does training look like. And this is a really important thing to do because this allows us to get into the mind of the trainer just a little bit. So if they were blowing you smoke in the beginning, this can help weed through some of that smoke, maybe clear the fog a little bit, and get down into the nitty gritty on what exactly are you going to do with the dog. So let's say your dog pulls on a leash and you say, well, what does your training program look like for that? I can tell you, like, my training program I do is train the dog to, when he sees a distraction, to look back at me. When the dog looks back at me instead of pulling toward the distraction, that's good. That'll keep the leash loose. And then usually I teach a hand targeting behavior or touch where I present a hand signal, usually like that. And the dog comes and just touches their nose to my hand. That keeps the leash loose. And then we continue walking. Now, if a trainer says, well, if the dog pulls, I'd like to use a prong collar and put it on the dog. So when he pulls, he feels a little discomfort in his neck. Big red flag. You don't want to do that. So it's good to find that out now versus 3 or 4 lessons into the training and then the prong collar makes an appearance and you're like, whoa, I didn't want that. Now you're 3 or 4 lessons in, you're out probably a few $100. You really don't want that. All right, guys, and the fifth and final thing to look for in a dog trainer is if you're struggling with a behavioral issue. So Dog training, in case you're not familiar, is divided kind of into obedience and behavior modification. So, obedience would be teaching simple behaviors like sit, down, stay, and they can get more advanced, like a go to bed type of behavior is a chain of multiple behaviors. So, you can get into that's all obedience. And then you can get into behavior modification. Behavior modification is we're training out an old behavior and training something new in its place. So, a good example of this and a real mild example would be jumping on guests or jumping on you when you get home from work. So, we want to train out the jumping and train in something different, like a sit or a down or something like that. That requires a bit more time. So if you're struggling with a behavioral issue and you want behavior modification, ask the dog trainer what they think the problem is. This is really important because, again, it allows us to get in the mind of the dog trainer a little bit. And when we ask that question, they may say, I don't know, or I don't know yet. And that is not a bad answer, actually. Even though it's probably not the most satisfying answer you want to hear, that's not a bad answer because when a trainer says, I don't know, it means they probably haven't seen every aspect of the dog's life yet. Sometimes things can encourage behaviors that we haven't explored just yet, and we need a little more time to figure it out. So, a good example of that would be a dog barks at the window and lunges at the mailman when he comes and drops off mail, and then the dog pulls on the leash. Well, why does the dog pull on the leash? Well, part of that could originate in the house because he's allowed to bark and lunge at the window. So if a trainer says, I don't know, they could just simply be saying, hey, I haven't seen the dog's I haven't looked at the whole picture of the dog yet, so I'm not quite sure what's going on. But if the trainer says something like, I think the dog's trying to be dominant over you, that's a big red flag. Usually that is not the case, and I would actually say pretty much every time that's not going to be the case, that the dog is trying to be dominant over us. It's definitely a question worth asking, and it can give you a lot of insight into the mentality of that dog trainer. Bonus tip. All right, bonus tip. I'm going to do 6 this time. So, bonus tip here would be, what type of training do you really want? What type of training program? So, there's kind of 3 big categories in dog training programs. So the big 3 categories are private lessons, which are usually at a facility or in your home, and that's one-on-one time with you and the trainer and your dog. Then you have group classes, which are great for puppies. A lot of animal shelters will do this, and companies like PetSmart and Petco all have group classes that you can join. And then you have board and train. Board and train tends to be the most expensive of these options, and that's where a trainer actually takes your dog for usually about 2 weeks and boards them somewhere and trains them while the dog's gone and then brings them back to you. There are advantages and disadvantages to each of these methods. I only do private training, private in-home lessons. Those are great for behavioral issues, especially behavioral issues in the house. So jumping on you, jumping on guests, a lot of times that's not necessarily replicated out in a training class. Maybe the dog's a little more reserved out in public and doesn't jump as much. So that can be great. Stuff like counter surfing, barking at the mailman, or any issues where you maybe don't want to take your dog in public. Those are great options for that. Group classes, like I said, wonderful for puppies because you're accomplishing 2 things at once. You're getting your dog a little bit of basic obedience training. Usually that's what's in those classes. And for puppies, you're getting them lots of socialization, which is really, really critical for puppies, especially between 3 weeks and 12 weeks. That is the most important time of a dog's life, and group classes are great for that. Board and train, like I said, tends to be a little bit more expensive. That can be a really good option for specialized training like hunting dog training or service dog training or therapy dog training. That's a great option for that because those trainings tend to be a little bit more intensive, and they're also really good for people that have odd schedules. For example, like a nurse or police officers, it can be great for them. Now, if you go with a board and train option, it is really important that the trainer offer follow-up lessons with you after you get the dog back. Dogs are very environmental on where they learn and who they learn with. So when a trainer takes a dog to a boarding facility and they train the dog there, the dog might be awesome at the behaviors in that environment and with that trainer. But when you bring them back home, they're going to regress just a little bit. You want to make sure you have follow on training with the trainer so you can have this transfer of training process between you and the dog trainer. If you have any questions, please drop them down in the comments below. I'll be happy to answer those and maybe make a whole video on different training options and who they fit best with. All right, guys, hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe to our channel. We got a lot of great content coming out. I'm hoping to get one video out per week, probably going to drop them on Fridays. So keep an eye out. Make sure you hit that notification bell so you get notified when we drop a new video. And go ahead and shoot us a follow on _Dog Training on Instagram. You get more training tips there. I post those from time to time, and you get to see all the dogs I work with. They're adorable. Spices up your Instagram feed a little bit and makes your day a little bit brighter when you get to see puppies that graduate training. All right, guys, I appreciate it. I'll see you in the next one.